ticklish business any way you look at it. Come on, we'll stick together.
Hello, everybody. It's Ticklish Business, the podcast all about celebrating old Hollywood. As always, I'm your host, Kristen Lopez, and today we have probably the coolest guest I might have all year. I don't know, but he is an author in his own right. He is an awesome person, and he is one of the sons of Audrey Hepburn herself, Shawn Hepburn Ferrer. Shawn, how are you?
I am fine. Thank you, Kristen, for the glowing introduction.
I mean, come on. Shawn is the I call co-author. Forward writers are based on the production of the book as well. He's worked on Intimate Audrey, an authorized biography on Audrey Hepburn. We're going to talk about that in a second. But I would like to remind everybody before we do that our Patreon keeps the lights on at Ticklish Biz and lets us do all sorts of fun things like this interview, like the interview we did with David Zucker, all sorts of fun things. So it starts at just $1 over at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. You get access to episodes 48 hours early, get all sorts of swag. I'm doing my walking tour soon of the Toluca Lake area, so you can find out about that early. It's all over at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. And a thank you, as always, to some of our Lombard level patrons who I don't thank enough, like Peter Bryant, Jacob Haller, Peter Blitstein, Debbie Lynne, Chris McKay, A Button Called Smalls, Linda Lindley, and Kate G. So yeah, consider heading over there. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you, because I'm starting to do video now. You can learn more about our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@the @ticklish business. And if you're listening via audio, we also thank you, because I've been doing podcasts for going on 10 years now. Not feeling weird about that at all. But if you are listening over on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, consider dropping us a rating and review. We would love it. It gets more eyeballs on the show. But enough of me yakking. We got Audrey Hepburn's son here. Let's talk about that. Shawn, I mean, you've done a lot of other things outside of maintaining the Audrey Hepburn legacy. I mean, you've worked in Hollywood, you're a writer, you've done all sorts of things. But I'm curious for you, and I wrote a little bit in the intro that you wrote for Intimate Audrey, talking about how there's been so many books, there's been so many things, and a lot of those things are no longer in print. So talk a little bit about wanting to, kind of wading through the morass of Audrey-related items that have existed over the decades, and finally wanting to kind of do something authorized like this book.
Right. Well, I guess this journey begins a few weeks after she passed away in January of '93. I had written this 30-page letter to my children, or to the children I'd hoped to have one day, because I didn't have any then. And that became at the beck and call of my agent, Alan Nevins, in the previous book that I wrote about her, which is more sort of a spiritual biography. And that was more than 25 years ago. And I'm very happy with the book, and it did great. And then my agent called me and said, I get asked every year at the book shows if there's going to be anything else on her. I said, my God, there's so much already. He says, yeah, but there's never been an authorized sort of the final word, sort of a historical book. And I'm not going to say that this is a historical book, because it would be a crashing bore, but certainly the research and the work that went into it with a fine-tooth comb does that. And then, of course, we packaged it in something interesting and light. Every chapter begins with script pages, so it throws you into the moment, the scene. We didn't go through every final milestone of her life, especially the films, which everybody know. So we dealt more with, her intimate life and who she really was, because that's one of the questions I get asked so very often. What was she really like? And of course, the answer is she was just like you saw her on film. She wasn't that different in personal life, but that's what people seem to want to know. But I wasn't sure that I wanted to do another book, especially in an arena where there are already so many. There are books about her neck and what would Audrey wear and Audrey's hat. I mean, it's endless. And then Alan put me in touch with Wendy. Wendy Holden is a wonderful writer. She started her career as a war correspondent. And that was one of the first things that sort of clenched it for me. My mother's life began with World War II and ended with the 5 years she spent as a UNICEF ambassador in war zones, because obviously, as we all know now more than ever, real human tragedy is man-made. We'll all find a way to get through a pandemic or to get through a tsunami or an earthquake. But the real tragedies, as we've seen on all of our screens now, are man-made. And it's been very hard, I have to say. After my mother gave her life, basically, for the hope of an inclusive society. And I've spent the last 33 years of my life trying to continue that dream, to see that it's all being dismantled. We all knew that democracy was delicate, but it's been dismantled with such ease that you start to wonder if it wasn't window dressing in the first place. And
100%.
so it's hard. Here we have this wonderful book coming out, and yet it's at a time maybe where it's needed to sort of remind us all what it's like and what she went through and what ashes she rose from. You know, it's a good piece of history.
Exactly. I think that that's always something that gets lost, in the Audrey mystique, in a way. I always think about we've interviewed Joel McCrae's grandson, and he's talked about how nobody wants a Joel McCrae biopic, because Joel McCrae didn't do anything particularly salacious or scandalous. He was just a dude. And you talk about that a little bit in the foreword, that, your mother was just a person, who did amazing things, yes. But, I think that that's always something that when I read Audrey Hepburn biographies, and you're right, there's so many of them, it feels, you can kind of almost feel an author kind of trying to hunt for something salacious or something, sensational. And I think that that's why I appreciate reading kind of all of the different things that I've read about her, which is that, you don't really have to find a lot. You don't have to hunt for things. Like, her story is fascinating on its own merits, if that makes sense.
Thank you for saying that, especially since you haven't read the entire book yet, or have you?
I'm working through it. I'm working through it. But I think, to read about her journey through World War II, which has been, discussed, and there's been biopics made about that time. That story on its own is fascinating. You don't really need to gild that lily.
Exactly. And I'm actually working on trying to adapt it into a screenplay. And by the same token, that I'm wondering how the Lily Collins team is going to be able to adapt Fifth Avenue, 5 a.m., the Sam Wasson book, into a film. I'm having the same difficulties here because obviously the first act is great. It's the war. There's a little girl running away from the Germans and helping the resistance. And then, she gets discovered at 23 when she wins an Academy Award. And it's all lovely and hard work, but there really isn't much drama until she returns, to the war in a way, and to, what she used to describe as her second and most important career as a UNICEF ambassador. And it's extraordinary how some of the bells she rang, 33 plus years ago, 35 years ago, we still haven't learned our lessons, and we're still repeating history over and over again. When we live in a society that has the technology and the capacity for everyone to have food, for everyone to have education, for everyone to live a normal life. Nobody's looking for yachts or private jets or anything like that. But certainly, and certainly for children to have a youth, it's not only about medical care, or, but to be saved from the horrors of war, and to be saved from ideology, which is really what has brought us here. And that's one of the greatest things she gave us as two boys, is to grow up in an ideology-free environment. And I think that that is something that in this day and age, we can see how it permeates on all levels the life of a child, and how you find yourself as an adult with all kinds of ideas which are not your own, which are not based on your own instincts or your own understanding of life, but are passed on and cause you to be part of a society which sometimes it takes a lifetime to get out of those rules and regulations.
Exactly. I mean, I have to ask you. The term nepo baby is now ubiquitous in our society. But to read about her as a mother, and to read about how she eschewed, Hollywood in a way to raise you and your brother, I'm curious for you. Was there a moment that you remember as a child when you realized your mother was famous or was different from other mothers?
Different from other mothers, yes. Going back to the Nepo baby thing, the second greatest gift she gave us was she gave up her career to be a full-time mom, but to be a full-time regular mom. We didn't live in Hollywood. I always say not the place or the state of mind. We obviously grew up in a nice home and we had food on our table and all of that. But there was nothing grandiose. There was nothing Hollywood, quote unquote, no fast cars, no private jets, no screening rooms, no, there was a beautiful house, a farmhouse with fruit trees, and we made our own apple juice and jams and vegetable soup from the vegetables in the garden. So a very normal, and I call it normal. It is indeed as well a luxury to have that kind of a youth, no doubt about it. Not everybody can afford it, but certainly it didn't sow the seeds of that other world of Hollywood. As far as what it was like and discovering her, I discovered her in slices. I mean, first I realized when I moved, she remarried and we moved to Rome, and I went to public school there, and French public school. You know, there were photographers around, paparazzi as they call them. And so that's when you first realize that someone is interested, and you think your mother's lovely, and so that must be the reason why. I knew that she was an actress, but she wasn't someone who would cultivate that. She didn't sit us down and show us the films. She let me discover them, which I did years later in my teens by hanging a sheet up in the attic and finding an old Bell and Howell projector and watching her films. In those days, we didn't have, Blu-rays or DVDs or even
Go.
VHS. An actor got a 16 millimeter print of their film at the end of it, and that's what I watched. And I learned how to fix with film when it broke, and that was my first times I learned how to splice and double tape the film if it broke. Lose a frame, unfortunately. So that's when I started to realize how good she was and how good the films were. And I started to understand that great film starts with great writing. And as she always said, and she was always the first to, give merit to the people around her rather than herself. But she was right in a way. Film is a fantastic construction, sort of like a chain. And she certainly wasn't its weakest link, but she always felt she might be. And so she worked extra hard to contribute to that long process. But it really wasn't until she passed away and our little village of 500 inhabitants in Switzerland grew to 25,000 people lining the streets and cars in the fields. It almost looked like a rock concert, like Coachella in Switzerland. And, that we realized that there was something there that had elevated her or placed her in the people's consciousness. And I think that the simple way of defining that is that, contrary to the Hollywood Parthenon, of untouchables, Cleopatras like Elizabeth Taylor. She was the girl from across the landing who puts on a little black dress and goes out into the world, but she remained sort of quote unquote one of us. And I think that's why she's still so beloved today. And I think that humility extended into the beauty of her spirit and the choices she made, after her career, as far as style is concerned, which is why she's still such an icon of style. And that style, that elegance, is something that comes from within. And then the third chapter, or the third leg, if you may, of this base is this work she did as a humanitarian, which seemed to reconfirm that the lovely soul everybody had fallen in love with was indeed a valuable one. And I guess those three pieces, those three legs, the sort of tripod, is what makes her base so lasting and so unforgettable.
No, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think people forget, and we talk about this a lot on the show, that culture is kind of stopped in Hollywood, at least. We're regurgitating the past. I'm a millennial, and they're regurgitating every movie I remember growing up with,
Yes.
to kind of get this new fan base. But we also aren't cultivating the pipeline of performers. We don't get people that get discovered like Audrey Hepburn did, or Lana Turner. It's not just the elegance, I think, but it's the style of acting. I mean, you watch, Charade, and people don't really talk about Audrey Hepburn's comedic timing, and her ability to. She genuinely is a phenomenal actress outside of the clothes and the accent and all of that, and we don't make that anymore. I don't think we celebrate that the same way in film.
It's interesting because she came right before the Actors Studio, Lee Strasberg,
Yeah.
all those wonderful actors from De Niro to Pacino to Brando and so forth. But the research she put into her parts, she didn't actually willingly or knowingly become the character as the Actors Studio sort of requires you to do. But I think hers was a way of putting herself into that person's shoes to a point where, while there is a fine line between those two definitions, I think it's pretty as close as you can get. And that's why I think the Actors Studio or the Strasberg method became sort of the underpinning of the Nouvelle Vague, at least in American cinema. At the same time, that ability to put herself into the other person's shoes is something that turned around against her when she became an ambassador for UNICEF, because she could feel as finely as you can imagine the pain and the suffering of all the people she was reaching out to. But that made her such a valuable loud hailer for those tragedies, because she would come back, and when she spoke about it, people knew they were touching the real thing. Today, we have finally, the television brought real life into your living rooms. The devices we use today, from cell phones to tablets to computers, bring the reality to you as an individual. And I think that's what has finally made it possible, for people to rise up and to stand up against injustice. And that is a extraordinary, threshold that we have crossed. And while I'm complaining about the fact that we have this, the oligarchs and the political system, which is based on an economic system, it's not based on what's best for the people. It's based on what's best for stockholders. Complaining about that, at the same time, if we can preserve platforms, remain independent and don't get tampered with, to squash and to reduce that capacity to reach everyone and to talk about what matters. But they're coming at us with extraordinary force, not only with the way that these applications have systems that can make certain issues more or less relevant. But they're also fatiguing us with exposure to, by having so many films be about crime and shootings and violence, that we are becoming, on one hand, sort of are building up a callous to human suffering, and on the other hand, we're being manipulated. So it's a battle. It's the new form of battles. Wars before or uprisings were done in the streets, and now I'm thinking of the late '60s and so forth. Today, it's a technological battle, and we may have to shed some of that technology and go back to our roots, which is people.
Exactly. I also think that the film industry today, you've worked as an associate producer and you spent some time in the film world as well. How do you look at filmmaking today? The process of, because I mean, you watch something like Sabrina or even Breakfast at Tiffany's, not my favorite Audrey movie, full disclosure, but they're so different. They're unlike
Yes.
what we see today. Even Sabrina
Uh,
on its surface is just a romantic, drama or comedy, and yet it's different.
to sort of recap, or to give you the Reader's Digest of my journey, I did work in production as an assistant director and a production manager and a co-producer for others. For the first 15 years of my career, I had worked as a child on films, doing bit parts and creating records and all kinds of things as a kid. But when I lost, or when we lost our mother, I felt that the legacy, the wake that she was leaving was so powerful. One, because she was taken so young, and two, because she was sort of taken at the pinnacle of this extraordinary second career as a humanitarian, that I felt that it might serve everyone better if I concentrated on that rather than tried very hard to make some silly action film that wasn't going to go anywhere. And so I sort of shifted from a career in production at that point to sort of managing and caring for her IP, for her image and likeness. And so, how do I see the film today? The technology has decentralized the industry without a doubt. The oncoming of high definition has taken what used to be a monopoly that the Hollywood studios had because of the cameras and the film and the labs and all of that. Um, in the same way they went west to not be subject to the control of these rental houses on the East Coast originally, today we've gone further west. And with $10,000, a young filmmaker can have a prosumer camera and a setup on a laptop with the editing, everything you need to make a film, basically. Albeit it may not be ready for theatrical distribution, but a lot of it is going back on a screen, on a computer screen. At the same time, the digitalization of our industry has made it so that we are softer on preparing. We don't have, because the cost is reduced, whether you take a digital photograph or a piece of film, you can retake or reshoot it or whatever without having to think about so much what you're actually capturing and at what moment and what the light and the performance. And so there's less pressure. And is the loss of that pressure going to make for better or for worse? I think it's going to do both. But I was talking about that. The great photography happened before the digitalization of Hollywood. And a lot of people are choosing to shoot on film, and then because you catch, you get that wonderful texture that you don't get with ones and zeros. And then, of course, the ones and zeros will help you to repeat it, but you've captured, just like you capture the sound with an analog microphone of an instrument, or a voice, the same way you capture it with film, and you get, a texture that is irreplaceable, I think. And so I think I see my kids are taking pictures with 35 millimeter films. They're buying records and collecting old LPs and 33
Same.
RPMs. And so I think we can tell the difference between Coke and Diet Coke, okay? Real sugar and some kind of substitute. And I use that terrible example because both are toxic when it comes to the Coke. I believe that it's going to take us, it's sort of an uncharted territory, freedom, and yet, and if you apply these rules to the new technologies which are being assisted by AI, like deep fakes, and now we're talking about bringing actors back to life.
Yeah.
I've watched, at least as of now, I've watched Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt fighting it off on the ceiling of a building, and it somehow doesn't grab you. Why? Because instinctively or on some genetic level, we know it's not real. Because acting is not just about movement or about, recreating something which looks lovely, but it's all about the little subtexts and the things that when you put an actor in front of a camera and give him a close-up, my mother used to say that Henry Fonda was one of the great actors because he was a thinking actor. And I think you want to see that thinking going on behind the eyes. And unfortunately, with AI, we're never going to have that. And so I don't think actors and writers and filmmakers are at risk. Yes, we may. And the same thing goes also for backgrounds. Today you have these studios with these amazing green walls and video walls, and you can sort of bring the world to you, but it's not the same thing as being there. Would Lawrence of Arabia have been such a treasure if it had all been shot on a stage with video walls? Or
Not
do
at
you
all.
have to have a crew at midnight, on the dunes to actually capture all of it?
You need that tangibility, you need that texture that you talk about. I mean, it's always disheartening to find out that Jimmy Stewart, AI Jimmy Stewart, is reading bedtime stories on like apps or something like that. And I mean, I think that with technology expanding, and that makes that legacy that you talk about, kind of carrying that legacy, all the more important. And I know some children of older actors kind of rail against that, or they feel that that's too much pressure. How do you feel back when you started kind of carrying the torch for your mom's legacy, and today, did that change? Did you ever feel pressure being like, I'm the one representing her at this point?
No, I'm not the one representing. I'm sort of the curator.
Yeah, yeah, I love that.
And of course, because of her, not because of anything I did, she has sort of been carried into the future like the Pied Piper she was by the younger generations. It started 20 years ago when tweens and teens sort of had this wonderful kaleidoscopical view of who she was. Some knew the glasses and the trench coat, and other people saw her few minutes of Breakfast at Tiffany's, and others knew she went to Africa. And altogether, they had a sense of who she was. And today they're young adults and they're passing it on to their children. And I'm seeing it happen all over again, 2 generations later, and so I've sort of, in my own respect of a Hippocratic oath of sorts, I've first done no harm and made sure that everything that was done in good taste and and quality. There's a lot of energy that goes into protecting that, because very often people see the success and what she means and what she represents, and they want to grab it and use it. There's a great divide, though. Audrey Hepburn is like a Ferrari. You can't just buy it and drive it out of the lot. You need to go for a weekend to learn how to drive something that has 6, 8, or 1,000 horsepower, between the tires and the pavement. And so it's the little fly-by-night T-shirt producers and tchotchkes who try to get away with it, and then the minute you catch them, they sort of roll on their back and claim poverty and that they really went bankrupt and they didn't sell that many units. But the real companies, the people who understand the value of what she represents, they sort of can appreciate the need to have me or us involved and to help them use it the right way. That's a very, very important. What else can I tell you about that?
I was going to say no. So no AI Audrey Hepburn under your watch is what I'm hearing, which I'm very good.
I don't think so. I do have a project with my friend Eduardo, which is more kind of a research. It's a page on Instagram called Digital Audrey, and he has curated his own artificial intelligence, which it's an open source which resides on his own server. Because, as you know, we all have this romantic idea of AI being sort of like the HAL from 2001,
Yeah.
Space Odyssey. That's never going to happen. There's never going to be that kind of AI with the capacity that we would like it to have, where you wake up and it knows you by first name and knows what you've done for the last 10 years of your life and your children and the way you like your coffee. Because the amount of tokens it would require to generate that memory is only something that would be available to the very, very, very wealthy, because it's a huge amount of resources, of energy and storage to create that all-encompassing memory. So basically, you go to an LLM or to any kind of AI, and hopefully one day we'll also have quantum-based computing AIs. But the minute you leave, it sort of resets itself. It may remember some basics aspects of what research you've done or whatever, but you really have to start anew again. It doesn't remember you.
Exactly. To bring it back to Intimate Audrey, is there an element of I always ask this of children of, old Hollywood stars, is there a rumor or a factoid or something that previous biographers have kind of continued to perpetuate or get wrong that you were happy to rectify with Intimate Audrey?
Of course, when we sat down and Wendy became sort of the liver, the filter for all of this research, and I sort of, because I had been curating the estate for the past 30 some years, it was more of a passing of the guard, or passing of the arm to her, and she had to filter it and curate it all. But of course, it was sort of, we're going to get this right, because there's not going to be any second chance, to do that. And there were some things which were difficult choices, because it was mostly about the person and not so much about the career, because the career, we all know, we can rent a movie or we can download it and we can stream it and watch it, and that's the end of it. There were some difficult choices I had to make. One of them was the infidelity that she suffered. And of course, she was a very, very private person. And it was difficult to decide to include that in the book. And it's done very delicately, but at the same time, I know she wouldn't approve. But the decision I made ultimately is for all women rather than just my mother. women have been, we even have things, that are being considered today in America, which would set women back 40, 50, 60, 100 years. We still have ideological based, horrors being done to little girls in Africa, female mutilation. So it was ultimately when a woman suffers infidelity, in the end, our society still has a tendency to create that space for her to feel some sort of shame. And by talking about it, what I really wanted was to say, if Audrey Hepburn suffered infidelity, then anyone, it's fair game to anyone, which means what happened to you is not your fault, okay? What happened to you is you may have chosen unwisely, you may have followed what you saw with your eyes rather than what you felt with your heart or your instincts and whatever, but it's not your fault. And you pick yourself up and use it to learn and to step on your own shoulders and see further the next time.
I love that. You mentioned the Sam Watson book, which is going to be adapted into a movie. I have no idea, like you, how that's going to work out. We've seen the Audrey Hepburn story in the '90s with Jennifer Love Hewitt. How do you look at attempts to?
Jennifer is a lovely girl, and we became friends at the time.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I was gonna ask how you felt about adaptation of her life in general and what you thought of that film in particular.
I try not to feel too much because everybody ultimately is doing it out of affection. Think about Lily Collins. She bought the rights to this book 10 years ago out of affection to my mother. And whatever she does with it, she has my blessing ultimately. She's a delightful person, and obviously because of that, she's also a delightful persona on screen. If I can help, I will. I'm going to reach out and extend my. It's not about judging. I'm way beyond that. My mother is there and will be there long after we've all turned to dust, including all of these celebrities and all these people. She will still be there, and she will still shine a light into a possible alternative future, which we seem to be derailed from at this time. I'm here to help, and withholding judgment. There's a solution. I grant you, I have no idea how you take. I said to the Daily Mail, I used the word snapshot, and now it's being reposted as, how do you make a film from a photograph? I said, no, that's not what I was saying. You weren't listening.
Reading comprehension.
You weren't listening. It's a snapshot. It's a historical moment. It's a snapshot of the era, and really, Breakfast at Tiffany's is a meringue. It's a pavlova. It's all whipped up, but it's like that McDonald's milkshake. If you leave it on the tabletop, after an hour, you'll have about an inch of gook at the bottom. It's really all air. And that's why it works so beautifully. It's a very simple story. And it's the how. It's like that wonderful chef that makes extraordinary, extremely simple thing, but that is unforgettable. It's not about how many ingredients are complicated. We all know that a piece of raw fish on warm rice or lukewarm rice can be so-so, and it can be unforgettable. And that's really what it is. It's great cuisine at its finest with little to no ingredients.
It's fascinating too, because I grew up with the Audrey Hepburn story, and seeing that in the '90s, I know a lot of young millennial girls that became Audrey fans, and wanted to do that research after seeing Jennifer Love Hewitt play that. So it's always fascinating how some of these movies, kind of hopefully, bare minimum, will inspire a generation to actually seek out the real thing, and want to become old Hollywood fans and whatnot. So that's to say I'll see it, but I don't know how they're going to accomplish it.
No.
Yeah.
There's another film being made, I heard, and I spoke to the writer a very long time ago, called Dinner with Audrey, about the sort of an imaginary evening after they first met in Paris, and she, Balenciaga was too busy to do the clothes for Sabrina, and so he said, "Go to my protege," and he was starting off, and you know. It's interesting that those years were kind of, my father's first big hit, Lily, was that year. Leslie Caron was nominated for an Oscar at the same time as my mother for her part, and then my father and my mother met through Greg, and all of that is in the book. But it's in the same way that history repeats itself in the bad, it also repeats itself in the good. And what you can learn from this book is the inner workings of a success, but a well-earned and a humble success. And the same way, if Audrey Hepburn can be subject of infidelity, the same way the lesson, the story there, it's kind of a fairy tale, is you can succeed and you can have ultimately full life without being corrupted by the power and the success that you achieve. But you have to choose very wisely. The same way you have to choose wisely when you build your wardrobe and you make your choices. This came natural to that generation because they came from nothing and had very little. The same way the culture of a little cotton dress and espadrilles in Spain has become sort of a cornerstone of an entire fashion system. The same way these women that emerged from World War II knew how to use a jacket from 5 years ago with a pair of boots from 3 years ago, with, and mix and match things and be creative and not have to go out and buy a whole outfit every time, and, or be a frump, the rest of the day with the exercise clothes or whatever.
Exactly. Well, the last question I wanted to ask, which is the $1 million question, I think. Do you have a favorite movie of your mother's, or at least a movie you recommend if people?
I've been asked that question in every language, in every place in the world, from Japan to China to anywhere. We have exhibitions that have traveled all over the world. I have one in China right now, which is doing quite well. And those projects, we always help us to promote the humanitarian, whether it's financially. I used to have a nonprofit in the U.S. and now I have it in Belgium, and the exhibition was created to benefit its main project, which is rare diseases. She died of a rare form of cancer called PMP, pseudomyxoma peritoniae, 1 in a million. And as terrible joke is, she really was 1 in a million. But
I think for me, I'll answer the question, or at least clarify, in the sense that when I tell people if they want to see a different side to Audrey Hepburn, the persona, I think Sherrod is always the one I recommend because it's different.
My standard answer is each film had a place in her heart because of the wonderful and lifelong friendships that were born out of each film. Roman Holiday and Greg, and Sabrina and Billy, and so forth and so on. And Wait Until Dark with TY, with Terrence Young, who gave me my first start in the business as a production assistant, and Stanley and all of those films that they did together. These people became friends. These people became part of her life. And so I personally like films like Love in the Afternoon because they have this sort of most Lubitchian Billy Wilder film. I love Ernst Lubitsch. I mean, that's it. We're going way back. And what America used to be, which is a wonderful collector of foreigners who brought their own dreams from the countries all over the world. We're trying to get rid of that now, and we are refuting our own DNA, by re-exporting people who come here with dreams. And no matter how small, you don't have to be a famous German director who survived the Third Reich and comes over and brings a new way to make films. You can come from Mexico and find a beautiful way to make something or prepare something, in a restaurant or a fast food or whatever. That is the DNA of America. Americans don't exist. There are no Americans apart from the American Indians, who were here before any of it. But we seem to be turning our backs on it. And anyway, I love that. I love Funny Face because she wanted to be a dancer. And it's wonderful to see her finally be able to spread her wings as a dancer with Fred, who of course is a legend, an absolute
I just discovered that movie last year. I finally saw Funny Face, and it is utterly brilliant. I was kicking myself that I waited so long to watch it. So
it was the first musical based on fashion,
yeah. And I mean, everything is it's epic beauty to me. I mean, everything's on another level. She's gorgeous. Costumes are gorgeous. The color is gorgeous. All of it. It's perfect. Well, Shawn, oh my gosh, thank you so much for nerding out with me for the last 40 odd minutes. It's been such a pleasure. The Intimate Audrey, at the time this comes out, it'll be out on shelves.
It comes out on the 7th of April.
Yep.
I will be in Rome doing a show for Rai. I'm in Florence right now. I'm in Italy. I left the United States 20 years ago last year when we decided it was a good idea to invade Iraq and all of that.
You haven't missed much.
And I know I've come back, but now at this point, I guess what I saw coming down the pike then was just a picnic compared to what we're living
I don't blame
now. But
you.
I wanted my kids to grow up, again, the same way our mother enabled us to grow up outside of Hollywood. I wanted my kids to grow up normally and take the train and see their friends and not have to be driven everywhere in Los Angeles or have bodyguards or, and everything that comes, the dangers of society, which is weaponized to the point that the U.S. society is, in the name of an amendment, which really
you're right there with you.
Created that to defend yourself against your government, which is, here we have a law now, but we're not using. But yeah, so I left a long time ago, and I don't plan to come back until you guys get it together.
I know we're working on it. God, I hope we're working on it. But where can fans find you online? Anything, social media, anything regarding the book that they should be on the lookout for?
The book is going to be available. It's going to be available on Amazon. I did do, for the first time in my life, and I'd done records as a kid, and I've done voiceover and things, and ADR as an actor. But I did do an audiobook of the book with some wonderful actors. But the main sort of voice is my voice, and I'm reading it. So I know a lot of people prefer that these days.
I do, yeah. Audiobooks are big.
That's available as well. But it's a good book to have in the future. Your own children will, on a rainy Sunday afternoon, watch an Audrey Hepburn film, curled up on a sofa with a blanket, and then they'll turn to their mom and say, well, who was this woman? What was she like? And so here now we have this little piece of history, this encapsulation of a wonderful woman who came from nothing and, returned the favor at the end of her career to our society. And it really is a fairy tale.
That's going to close out Ticklish Business for today. As always, you can connect with me old school at ticklishbiz@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me via social media at ticklishbiz, unless it is Twitter, where we are at ticklish_biz. You can connect with me directly at Kristen K. Lopez, unless it's Instagram, where I am still at Kristen Lopez 88. My site, thefilmmaven.com, has all of my writing as well as all sorts of other fun things. And I have my books. You can pre-order your copy now of But Have You Read the Book Romance Edition for publication on July 28th. I have some fun stuff planned for the TCM Classic Film Festival, so be sure to get your pre-orders in now. I'll be talking more about that book as we get closer to it. We will have a new episode in 2 weeks. Till then.